If you could take your seat quickly, that would be terrific. And welcome back. Time is of the essence now, so we're all going to be fairly succinct to the point. We'll move it along, but we do want to have a chance for, right at the end, to ask Warren to say a few more things just right at the end, but we'd like to try to hold the schedule around 4 o'clock so that people can get a rest and have a break before dinner. There's been so much vitality and good feeling in this room. We'd like to give you a chance to have a bit of a break and come back, and we've got a wonderful evening in store. Now, we are at a university where we pride ourselves on teaching, but we also pride ourselves on learning. And today, more than anything else, I hope that we and who work and live in university life can learn from others about a subject that's very much on the mind and has really started in the first session about how we can prepare people to lead and to lead well. We were reminded by Georgette earlier today that people do, with $3 coffee and people able to afford that, the standard of living may be pretty good, but the people's sense about the world, as Howard Schultz reminded us, is not one at the moment that is encouraging. There's a sourness, and there's almost an anxiety that borders on depression about the future. We took a survey last year in our project with U.S. News on identifying America's best leaders on confidence in leadership, and 2/3 of the people in this country said they did not have confidence in our leaders. Nearly 3/4 of the people in that survey believed that unless we improve the quality of leadership in the country, that we would have a crisis. There is out there this we all know it. There's this feeling that's taken hold of us, even in the midst of relative prosperity for a lot of people, especially at the top. There's a feeling that somehow the world is becoming unhinged, and we have to deal with it. Now, the question is, at this university, at this center, how we prepare people for positions of public leadership. But I would suggest to you that the public does see certain groups of leaders as being better than others. What our survey found was that people have much higher faith in people who are leading the business community, than they do in people who are in the public sector. And they have even more faith, in fact, they have the most faith in this country, in our military leadership. Now, and in their integrity, their charisma, but especially their capacity to be effective and get things done. So what I'd like to do is to direct some of the early parts of this discussion is, what can we learn from the business community about preparing people for leadership? What did they do that we can learn from, that we can embrace, that we can adapt? Then we'd like to ask, what can we learn from the military community? So what I'd like to do is start with some representatives from the here on the panel. We have Sid Harmon and Bill George, both of whom have been outstanding leaders in the business community who have gone on to teach, to write, to think in ways that have been highly constructive, and then draw in some of the others who are here among us. John Alexander, who runs the Center for Creative Leadership. We have others among you I'd like to draw from the audience and talk about business leadership and what you've learned and how we can think about this. Then I'd like to go essentially to the military leadership, and we have Thad Allen, who's here, who is now the Commandant of the Coast Guard. Everybody in America knows him as one of the few people who really led well during Katrina. And we owe you a debt of honor, sir, for doing that. Among the group here is also General Shinseki. Where is Rick Shinseki? See here? Right here. As you know, Rick Shinseki was the Army Chief of Staff, the man who argued that we should have several 100,000 troops in Iraq, and whose views were not accepted. But who served very honorably. I won't, like so many others, he paid a lot of prices along the way in his leadership, including some severe wounds in Vietnam. Scott Snook is here, who developed the leadership training program at West Point now, and he left the military because he was someone who was taken down by friendly fire friendly fire, and is now here at the business school at Harvard. And so I'd like to ask his participation as well, and we have others then. And then I'd like to ask the academics who are here to reflect on what we've heard and to talk about how we can draw it into the academic community. How do we bring these lessons in from business and from the military? And one person I'm going to depend on continuously in all of this is our good friend Spencer Johnson, who was here with the students earlier and has learned how to write in ways that all of us sort of look at and say, whoa, how did he do that? This is a man who he got on the bestseller list with a book about 1982, with Who Moved My Cheese? No, the 1 Minute Manager, that's what with Ken Blanchard. 1 Minute Manager, that was the first, and he's had 10 straight bestsellers on the New York Times bestseller list. Among adult book buyers, his books have been translated into 42 languages with 42 million hardcover sales. 42 million hardcover sales. We're delighted you're here. And he rarely appears in public. Only when John Connor and Warren Bennis get a hold of him does he appear in public. So we have a wonderful group here on this panel. But as always, let's kick this off, as we should, with some thoughts from Warren Bennis captured on film. And Gail Friedman, where's Gail Friedman? Stand up. Gail Friedman is the woman who made these films. And we appreciate the producer of this. And Bob Sternberg, whom I didn't introduce on the panel, among the academics, who is over at Tufts now as the dean over there. He was at Yale for many years, a major figure in organizational social psychology, who is introducing at Tufts the whole notion of, can an academic institution as distinguished as Tufts place a greater emphasis upon leadership in the undergraduate curriculum? Is there a way you can weigh leadership potential as you admit people and then do things within that framework? Richard Hackman, who's here, who is a towering figure in psychology here at Harvard Yard, teaches the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, but has become a wonderful friend for the center. Howard Gardner, who is here, and we are going to ask to call on. We've got a number of other people. You've heard from Howard earlier, who asked a trenchant question in the first panel. So we're going to try to draw upon a number of people, and as we go, I'll try to draw other people in. But I want, as Warren Bennis would put it, in this session, to learn how to be what he called a deep listener, to engage in deep listening, to listen to these people and understand what we can, because we have such fine talent to come here this afternoon. So roll the film, let's see it.
In a way, it's perhaps an appropriate hubris. It's a big aspiration to say we can learn more about this, and not only that, we can create. I wouldn't use the word teach. I think leadership is something that's caught, not taught.
There's a hunger for skill building.
Right.
How do you increase your leadership capacity? How do you hone the skills that are necessary?
What we have to do, and this gets at the word integral, integrated, we have to actually help leaders become generalists. And that means putting together, they're not the ones that are going to find out, all those things that need to go into a decision or a judgment. No one can do that alone, unless you're running a very small mom and pop shop. So you need to collect all these items of information, and you have to organize them and integrate them, and see as a basketball coach would say, see the whole court. And it's a delusion of unique individuality to think that we know it all. It's just, that is stupid beyond words in this world. Our responsibility to educate people to be leaders is to really integrate, to be able to put together, to be able to make sense out of a highly complex pattern. So we've got to create in our leaders of the future a sense of wonder, and create in them the capacity to be masters of doubt and uncertainty, and to have next steps to take, knowing that we don't know and moving ahead. Those are the things in an educational system. And then we can also teach them a thing called accountability and responsibility. The best organizations do that. I've never felt that that the time was as ripe, as fecund as it is now to have a better shot at creating ethical, moral, exemplary leaders that this country really needs. And what greater responsibility do we have? I mean, we're playing for mortal stakes, especially right now in this world.
Generalists, integrity, holiness. It seems to me, Sid Harman and Bill George, those are very much themes that the two of you have sounded. Sid, after Sid built Harman International, but I think in addition to his business success, is also known as a wonderful human being who has supported all sorts of good causes. And by the way, is now, we've heard about Shakespeare several times, is now the driving force behind building a new theater in Washington, which is going to accommodate not only Shakespeare, but new modern plays by unknown playwrights to bring them onto the stage. But he wrote a book just 3 years ago, I guess it was now, isn't it? I think it was called Mind Your Own Business. And one of the things you said in there was, and businesses ought to hire poets. They ought to hire poets. Tell us about your thoughts on how this society develops people into being good business leaders.
I was reminded by Tom Peters that almost 30 years ago, Ed Muskie, wonderful Ed Muskie, came by to visit, saw on the coffee table in the living room a lovely little tome by a splendid poet, Edwin Newman. You remember Edwin Newman, of great television fame, a literate man, and that lovely book was entitled Changing Our Universe. Muskie, the politician, turned instantly to the index, found no reference to Muskie, and discarded the book. Not so fast, Ed, said I. Before you dismiss that, read the inscription in it. Muskie opened the book and read the inscription. It read, "To Sidney Harman, who taught me everything I know about the English language. With great admiration, Edwin Newman." Muskie said, "That is impressive." I replied, "If you think that's impressive, Ed, wait until I tell you that I wrote the inscription myself." If I were asked, to offer advice to students wishing to become leaders in a changing world, I think I would reduce it to 4 very brief recommendations. And the first would be, get out there and learn something about the world. Don't be the hibernated, isolated American, always enthralled to the notion of American exceptionalism, American triumphalism, American unilateralism. Challenge the orthodoxy. In Abe Lincoln's glorious language, we must disenthrall ourselves, then we can save our nation. And the second suggestion I would make to such a student would be to recognize the enormous importance of developing a personal philosophy of criticism. The ability to exercise critical judgment. It is no surprise to me that Warren's new book, co-authored with, now it appears, at least 40 individuals, I claim to be the co-author, is devoted to that whole question of judgment. Critical judgment does not arise easily, and my strong urging would be, wherever you get it, whether you get it through intensive reading, through religion, through engagement in the Peace Corps, however it does develop for you, come to learn what you truly believe in. And then, if you set about being effective in a changing world, check every decision through that exercise of critical judgment that is based in having developed a personal conviction about what you truly believe. And the third thing I would suggest to any of the students wishing to learn to be a leader in an emerging and changing world is don't get intoxicated by the notion of change. Don't throw out the rare wine with the bathwater. Exercise that critical judgment to determine what there is that should be retained that is really good before you move to change the world, the country, or yourself. And then finally, I would note that there's an enormous difference between training for leadership and the exercise of that responsibility once you're in the role of leadership. Somebody spoke earlier about how critically important it is to be able to deal with crisis, and to do it, one thing is damn sure: you better keep your cool. Learning how to keep your cool then is vitally important. And then finally, I remember Joe Nye this morning talking about that part of his education which occurred during his years serving President Carter. I had my own. That, I suggest, is a great man. But when he was president, and it was my privilege and responsibility to participate in meetings, I noticed an invariable element. It was that irrespective of the subject, and irrespective of the people at the meeting, nearly all of whom was definitionally expert, the president knew or seemed to know more about the subject than anybody else. And as a consequence, the meetings consisted essentially of talking heads listening to other talking heads. Once in a while, you would hear an observation, an idea from another participant that seemed vitally interesting or vitally important, but never at any one of those meetings did I experience that glorious moment when something emerged that nobody had brought to the meeting. The leader who catalyzes that leap of imagination is the kind of leader I think is particularly, urgently required in a changing world. And then in the end, I would say, before you get about the business of changing the world, focus on yourself.
Sydney, on that last point about changing the world and then changing yourself, you have a favorite quote from Mencius, I think, about that.
David, remind me what you...
But first, if you're going to change the world, first you have to change your nation. I was trying to remember, because I've heard you use this once or twice, about if you want to change all this up here, then you have to change something down here, and very, very soon you've got to start changing your community, and then your family, and then your...
Mencius, a great Chinese philosopher, said that the men of old, wishing to clarify and diffuse throughout the empire that light which comes from looking straight into the heart and acting, first set up good government in their own states. Desiring good government in their own states, they first organized their families. Determined to organize their families, they first disciplined themselves. And eager to discipline themselves, they first rectified their hearts. I think that's an appropriate tribute to Warren Bennis, the rectified heart.
Thank you. That perspective, which, by the way, it seems to me we've heard, it's an interesting way today. We heard from Howard Schultz, we heard from Ron Zorts, from other leaders in the business community, that same sense that it's your heart matters as much as your head and the bottom line. And it also seems to me very consistent with what Bill George has written in a book that was a major bestseller about a year and a half ago on the authentic leader. Bill is a gentleman who is best known in the business community for building Medtronic, being a very enlightened CEO, one of the few who was willing to speak out. When trouble first hit in the business community and questions of scandal, he spoke out about the quality of leadership among CEOs in a very dramatic way. But then he went on to write this book, and he's come here to the business school. We're so fortunate that he's become a member of this community with his lovely wife, Penny, who runs a foundation and on integrative medicine, who's here with us as well today, and just recovering from surgery, so we're so pleased to see you with us, Penny. But Bill's now in the midst of working on a second book on becoming an authentic leader, and he teaches a course at the business school. Well, he teaches a couple of courses. Everybody over there teaches it, very vigorously, but he's very popular there among the business school students on the subject of leadership, with a special emphasis upon authentic leadership. Bill.
Thanks, David. I'd like to pick up on some of the things Sidney said. I think we've had the wrong notion of leadership. And when I was a little boy until my early 20s, I was studying great leaders, what I call the great man theory of leadership. How can I be more like these great people? And to me, leadership today is in business. If you want to create, and I know much more about business leadership, I can't claim to know anything about political leadership or even educational leadership. But in business, if you want to have a great company, you want to have thousands of leaders everywhere. Some of them don't have anyone working for them. You want to have people that are empowered to step up and lead. We heard on the tape that Warren was asked, what about leadership skills? To me, and I don't understand this. Leadership is not about skills. And we went out and talked to 130 authentic leaders. As Kim Clark, the former dean of the business school, said, you wrote your first book from your own experience. The second one, you have to write from the experience of others. And so we had long, in-depth interviews with people who have been highly successful, ages 23 to 93. So a pretty good spread. And the things we learned from these people is about their leadership is not about your characteristics, your traits. No wonder the 1,400 studies I've done, been trying to correlate leadership to style, characteristics, and traits, have all come up empty. Because it's not about that. It is at once far more complex, because we as human beings are far more complex than any category of traits, and it's far simpler than that. It's about learning to lead yourself. And the hardest person you'll ever have to learn to lead is yourself. When you can do that, you can do anything, because you understand what it's all about. You understand that leading is not about people following you. I think we have this notion of legions of followers, like we're all going over the hill following this great leader. That's not about leadership. Leadership is about empowering others to step up and lead. Of course, you have to create the canvas. Howard Schultz uses a wonderful concept, Starbucks, a canvas to paint on. You have to create the context. What is the overall purpose of our organization? I worked for an organization for 13 years. Its purpose was to restore people to full life and health. Sounds very noble, but I know people are trying to create great financial wherewithal for other people. I know I was on the board of Target. They're trying to create great, exciting products at good value. But when you can inspire people around that purpose and bring people together that can buy into a reasonably common set of values, then they can step up and lead. And that's what it's all about. So what we heard from leaders was that, again, it's not about even what they're doing in their leadership. We interviewed one person, whose name I won't give you, but he's the most successful commercial banker in the United States for the last 20 years. He grew up in a small rural town. I called him up and said, please tell me, what's made you so successful. He spent the first 22 minutes of the interview talking about the small town where he grew up, where no one ever went to college, where the honored people were teachers, where he worked in a produce store every day from age 7 up to 19 because his family had no money, okay? And he played sports 3 hours a day, and he learned about it in those two places. And now he's taken that into his bank. And the reason his bank is so successful, because he understands the relationship between the person you walk into the bank and the customer who comes in, that you're there to help them. Now, how do you empower all those people? You can write a rule book, you can tell them what to do, but they'll never lead. You want to give them the power to lead and step up and lead, and that's what leadership is all about. It does come from the heart. Look, the greatest, most important qualities of leadership are not intellectual qualities. This same person said to us, probably above 95 or 99% IQ, leadership is inversely correlated. You don't have to be a Baker Scholar at Harvard Business School to be a good leader. In fact, probably the best leaders are people that kind of somewhere in the middle of the pack. It's really, it's not correlated to those things at all. It's really people who understand how do you empower others. But first, you have to understand yourself and being true to your life story. To go back to where did you come from? Are you true to your roots? We see all kinds of leaders that go away from their roots and try to be something they're not. They're trying to emulate. As someone once said, I have great admiration for Jack Welch. Someone once said, gee, who work for him said there are 1,000 people trying to emulate Jack Welch. Well, how would you like to try to emulate Jack Welch or Winston Churchill or any other leader? It's not possible. And so you have to be that person you are. And what do you want from a person you work for? You just want them to be themselves. And so, but that requires development. It's not something you just are born with. You have to continually develop yourself, just like Lance Armstrong winning the Tour de France did not get there because he had great natural qualities alone. He had to work at it, and he said, I talked to him once, and he said, the reason I won the Tour de France is because I biked more miles than anyone else in the entire tour, But you have to develop. Why shouldn't leaders have to do the same thing? You don't get to Carnegie Hall to play the cello unless you practice every day. And leadership is an art that needs to be practiced in the real world. You need to learn how to fail, how to get knocked down. We talk about Jim Burke as a great leader at J&J. How many people know here that he had 3 businesses he started, all of which failed? And his first major product line at J&J failed. And the general told him, thank you for failing. I hope you learned something. Just don't do it again on this product, but fail many other times. We have to get kind of thrown into the game and learn about it. And that's where we really learn about ourselves. Anyone can tell you they have good values. You don't really know about your values until they're tested under enormous pressure, where everything you've built up for the last 20 years, you're about ready to lose. That's when the real test comes. And so it's those qualities of the heart. It's having compassion for the people you're serving, for the customers. It's having empathy for the people you work with every day. It's having the passion for whatever the purpose of your business is. And I think you have passion for purpose in any business. But if you don't have passion for it, you might as well get out and sit on the beach. If you're not really excited about what you're doing for the customers you're serving, it's time to leave. Because if you just try to get your employees inspired about serving shareholders, forget it. Forget it. They don't make the link. They get excited about serving your customers. And if they're not, then maybe they should be asked to leave. And finally, it's about courage. It's the courage to fail. It's the courage to take great risks, because everything great that's ever been done had a high risk of failure, and maybe did fail a few times until we got it right. And that's where the great things are done. So I think it's in those qualities that we have to develop ourselves. And when we can develop ourselves, then we can go on and understand that it's not about us and people following us over the hill, but it's about empowering other people to step up and lead in every position in the organization, not just making it to the top and being tapped on the shoulder and say, now you're the CEO, now you can lead. It's don't wait for the leader. Let's go out and lead and make something happen. And that's what the great business organizations that I've looked at, that's the way they all operate.
Bill, if leadership is a lifetime journey, what have you discovered about the role that a business school can play in helping people on that journey? What do they do best? What can they most succeed at? You've now been at the business school here, and you've taught at Yale, you've taught in Switzerland.
Business school is at its worst if we train people analytical tools. They go out of the school, they make a lot of money, and think they're going to live their life using those analytical tools, which will be obsolete in about 3 years. Business school is at its best if it's a transformative experience, where you throw yourself into it, and you say, as I hear from my students, I was number 1 at everything I ever did before I got here. There are 900 students in my class. I'm barely at the middle of the pack. And you start to realize that person you dismissed sitting over there that you didn't think was very good, you really could learn a lot from that person. But most person you learn the most about is yourself and where you fit in this world. It may take, I'm still figuring it out, but it may take a long time in our lifetime to figure out where we fit in this world. But when we do, then we can be at our best in leadership roles. And that's what, to me, a business school should do. Now, I think it should do it at every step of the way. I think the idea that you get your education at 27 and you go on till 87 and never get any more education is totally crazy. I think we need opportunities to intersect. I was working with a group of 40 and 45-year-olds this morning. They are so turned on about learning about leading and what they can do and taking the next step in their organization. It's just great. And with a group of people, we're now creating a program for people in their 60s that are going to go on and lead for the next 30 years. That's what we should provide, is that environment for continuous dialogue. We have a concept we're developing, David, that, education at Harvard Business School is not about knowledge transfer. It's not the professor transferring his or her knowledge to the students. It's about knowledge exchange. What can we learn? I've learned so much from students from Pakistan and Bangladesh about child labor that I never understood before. And if we can't learn from each other, then we have no hope in the workplace.
It's interesting. That echoes what Linda Hill said earlier today from the business school faculty about this is not separate and apart from life.
Yes.
What goes on in the classroom. There's actually a learning experience for both. Let's go briefly to the floor, and then we'll come back to Spencer. Yes, please. Yep. No.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more with what Bill said, but I guess I have a challenge or just a question. When you think about the fact that people spend 75% of the time they spend awake as adults connected to their work, and when they go to work, even though they live in a democracy, they don't work in a democracy. So as soon as we walk through the doors, we're no longer in a democracy. And so we expect people to step up and be empowered, because we have the leaders that Bill's saying, we really have to empower people. I don't think we can just say to leaders, empower people, and then not teach people how to be empowered. And I think empowerment, for the most part, has failed, because we have put the primary focus on people who are running organizations instead of the people who are in the roles to be empowered and to really step up. And so what I would love to see, and I guess my challenge is the whole notion, we spoke about this earlier today a little bit, is self-leadership, is the idea of personal empowerment. And maybe the future is not so much just focusing on leaders who are in leadership roles, but leaders who are individual contributors, that we need to teach how to be responsible within the organization. You know, David, you said, what can we learn in public leadership from business leadership? Well, I think business has a lot to learn about how to create a more democratic environment where people really do feel they have the mindset and the skill set to be empowered.
Thank you.
Can I respond to that? Yeah, that's exactly. Oh. That I agree 100% with what you're saying. I'll give you an example. Back when I got out of college before I came to Harvard, I spent a summer working at IBM, and it was quite a fine, outstanding hierarchical organization. I was back there recently, and they have the values that Sam Palmisano, who I think is a tremendous, authentic leader, is trying to convey across 350,000 people. So I ran into him the next day, and I said, tell me about I love your values, Sam. He said, well, let me tell you how those came about. We actually had a company-wide blog where all the employees in the company could participate in deciding what were the things that were really important to IBM, what do we really stand for. And that's how it came about. And I had a student in my class from IBM Day, and he said, that's exactly, I feel so empowered because I'm a part of that. And so we can all, in that sense, step up and lead if management doesn't take it away from us and gives us that opportunity to lead and to fail at the same time. Because if you're going to let people do that, they have to be able to make mistakes.
People need to be trained on how to do that.
Well, or given the freedom to do it. Yeah.
Okay. I would offer the observation that business is becoming more democratic and public life is becoming less democratic. Spencer, at the heart of your books is the notion of people having to learn how to change themselves and the fear. You know, and Who Moved My Cheese that we talked about, the page that people cite and they want you to autograph is which one?
Extraordinarily, they often come up with the book open and ask me to sign a particular page, which has never happened with any other book, and it's almost invariably always the same page. It's the aphorism that says, what would you do if you weren't afraid? And we nominated, the National Selection Committee nominated America's Best Leaders. I sent out an email to 25 good friends of mine, all of whom are nationally prominent leaders, and asked them to nominate people for America's Best Leaders. Do you know that 15 of them and I talked to them all personally, could not come up with one name of someone that they admired. I said it was in association with the Center for Public Leadership, so I suspect they were skewed to think of public leaders. But I thought Howard Schultz said something very important this morning. He said he's been traveling around the world, and as he travels around the world, he becomes more aware that more and more people do not admire, trust, or respect our leaders. And so I talked to these people and asked, why do you think we don't have more leaders? And I think it comes back to that, what would you do if you weren't afraid? I think leaders are so criticized today. All right, thank you. Leaders are so criticized today that a lot of people are afraid of standing up and leading. This theme is called Growing Leaders in Changing Times. I would suggest that we do two things in trying to help people discover how to be good leaders. Churchill said, "Personally, I don't like being taught, although I love to learn." And I think that's really a crucial concept. The reason that I write in parables, I never give anybody advice, mostly because most people don't listen to advice. But if they can discover in a story or an experience something that rings true to them, then it becomes theirs. And that can last for a lifetime. I think the biggest thing that is missing in growing leaders is truth. What if we taught veritas leadership? There's one word on the Harvard Shield, veritas, Latin for truth. What if we became more curious about the truth? What if we trusted the truth? What if leaders, young people like here at the schools, discovered the power of the truth? And look at the problems people have in our leadership, from corporate leadership to government. What's the source of the problem? If you keep going back to the core, the problem is what they're saying isn't true. It doesn't ring true to us. We don't trust it. So I think if you have both integrity and honesty, integrity telling yourself the truth, so often we spin it and come to believe what isn't true. It wasn't true, it's not going to be true, but we think it's true. So if you can tell yourself the truth and be curious about what's really true, which takes some humility that says you really don't know everything. If we became more humble and more curious about the truth and realized how powerful it was, I think if we could begin perhaps a course in Veritas leadership, but more often woven through everything, I think we'd have much greater respect for our leaders. I think they'd be much more effective because it would be based on the truth. So I think in a changing world, it would be nice to find things that don't change. And I think that the power of the truth is one thing that doesn't change.
It sounds very, very close to authentic leadership.
Well, I read Bill George's book, and I was with a group of students, an overflowing audience, high energy, very enthusiastic. And if you recall, I told them about your book. I worked at Medtronic in 1970. It's their first medical director of communications. I had 20,000 1970 shares. Then I decided to become a writer. So I starved to death for several years. And the stock took a rare dip, and the bank called and said, you know that loan you have in order to be a writer? Your stock's down, you have to sell all your stock. Bill told me they were worth what?
$320 million.
$320 million. So I'm very grateful to all of you who have bought my books.
It's a good thing you're a good writer.
My wife thanks you, my children thank you.
What's that word you have in Hawaii?
Mahalo. I do a lot of this. Mahalo. Thank you.
That's good. Where's Pat Sigarmi? There you are. Yeah, you're with Blanchard, and you're vice president for business development there, and I know with the good folks out there, how do you think about this question of developing, helping the people develop, and what can we learn from in a university setting from your activities?
I guess I'd like to hear the panelists respond to a question rather than make a comment. And
That we're learning something right there.
the question would be, who told you the truth? Who were your truth tellers? If truth is so important to you, what's been your most recent, your most powerful truth-telling experience?
Interesting question. Who would like to take a crack at it? Bill?
She's sitting right here in the audience. It's really helpful if you have just one person in your life that will tell you the truth and will hold up a mirror to your face and say, did you see how you were behaving today? Why are you trying to impress all those really important people at the Charles Hotel? Why don't you just be yourself? And my wife Penny was just great. She is a psychologist, and she taught me a great deal about how to be authentic, because it's something that we all need to be reminded of every day. But I say to my students, do you have a best friend? Do you have a mentor? Do you have a spouse? And if you can't have any of those, I'll tell you the truth, go hire a therapist.
Bill, have you ever met Jane Harmon?
Yes. Yes.
I imagine she's a truth teller in a certain household.
Jane Harmon tells truth to power, and I nearly always reject it.
Joan? Yeah.
Thank you. I have, for many years, admired Warren's commitment to supporting leaders who are people of color and women. And I know, David, of yours and Betsy's commitment for the center to support leadership from communities of color. If I look around our room today, I see that we do not represent the changing demographics in our country, and I feel that our country's at stake if we don't build leadership and support leadership from those communities. So I want to ask the panel, how can we, thank you, Phyllis, how can we in education, in higher education, and as one of the founders of Cambridge College, I'm proud to say that I know it can be done, how can we invite people from communities of color to feel safe, Spencer, to not be fearful, to come into a Harvard University program and to develop themselves as leaders?
Where's Walter Fluker? Yeah, that's good. No, Walter, get a microphone before you get the answer.
Hello?
You're there, Walter.
First, I need to ask Spencer, where's the $320 million?
With the bank.
Oh, okay. I just really wanted to know. It might come in handy. I don't have the panacea, the answer at least to the question of color and race in America, my God. But you could just invite people. I think that's the first step, invite people. I don't think any sensitive person who has been historically marginalized or is part of a marginalized constituency, anyone who is thinking and aware is going to feel totally safe at Harvard or anywhere else. But I've been back here thinking for at least 20 minutes of what it would look like to have a panel, with all due respect to those who are on the panel, but a panel that didn't have any white men and people who were not necessarily from America. I was at a lecture recently, David, and one of the students asked me, they said, when will we get another Martin Luther King Jr.? And I said, the jury is out on that, but I'm sure that when she appears, she won't be made in America. I think there's so much valuable work and there are so many valuable resources that we can identify outside of the communities of discourse and practice that we're so comfortable with. And this morning, I've forgotten who it was mentioning the various trips that he makes at least once every 8 weeks, and the kind
It was
of...
Howard.
Howard, right. And the challenges and really the despair. It really provoked a long conversation on despair. Let me tell you, I think that if there's hope for this world, it will not come from the builders of the American Tower of Babel, whose children have eaten sour grapes and whose teeth are on edge. Rather, it will come from the stones that the builders rejected. And those who build the Tower of Babel and who now struggle to put it back together probably make the greatest error not in trying to reach the heavens, David, but maybe not paying attention to the precious ingredients, the stones that have been rejected. You know, there's an old biblical adage which says that the stones that the builders rejected have become head of the corner. And this is the Lord's work, and it's marvelous to our eyes. That's just a comment.
Yeah. Walter, why don't you stand up? Just keep standing just a second. I just want to let people know. Walter directs the Leadership Center at Morehouse College. And they just opened up, they just had an official inauguration here in the last several months, and we formed an alliance, and we're trying to start a minority leadership program. We've been out seeking some money for that. We would like to have Harvard in an alliance with Morehouse and others, that we could reach out and identify rising young African Americans to start with in a program. And we're hopeful, Walter, we're going to get that done. You and I have been talking about and working on this for a while now. We're going to get it done.
Well, David, since I probably won't have this audience ever again, and I wanted so badly to do this, would you please join me in singing an old song that I heard my mama and daddy sing since I was a little boy? And I'm going to do it in my best voice, but I'm struggling. Just pick up the tempo and the tone. There's hope for this world. There's hope for this world. It's all going to be all right. There's hope for this world. Come on, sing it with me. There's hope for this world. There's hope for this world. It's all going to be all right. There's hope. Now turn to somebody you really, really, really want to hear this, and look them straight in the eye, and say it very gently and sweetly in a voice that they can hear. Say, there's hope for this world. There's hope for this world. It's all going to be all right. There's hope for this world. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Walter. And I'd like to move on if we can and we'll try to bring more voices into this conversation, but let's look at military leadership, because if there's one place in the country that has tried to introduce meritocracy and did it earlier and faster than perhaps a lot of other institutions, it has been in the United States military. It was a decision Harry Truman helped make way back, and it was we talk about courage, the word that was invoked here earlier by the rabbi. It was a courageous decision in 1948 to do that, and it's made a real difference. Thad Allen, let's turn to you first. You're here, sir, and help us understand how the military is training leaders and how it has been more successful in achieving more diversity.
Well, I think first of all, no military service can do their mission without leaders. Leaders are everything we do. We have to be about the business of creating leaders, otherwise we can't do what the country expects of us. In the Coast Guard context, I think it starts with our core values in the Coast Guard, which are honor, respect, and devotion to duty. And when I talk to our young Coast Guardsmen around the country, I speak of them as concentric circles. Honor is the compact you make with yourself on how you're going to conduct your life. It sets the context for you as an individual. Respect is the compact you make with those around you and how you're going to interact with the people who are on your ship, in your community, and so forth. And devotion to duty is a compact you make with your country. Now, over the years, we have principles of operations in the Coast Guard, as do our other services. But we've evolved slightly differently. We are the brainchild of Alexander Hamilton, who first thought of us in Federalist Paper number 12. It's called On Revenue. And when the Coast Guard was established in 1790, it wasn't called the Coast Guard, it was called the Revenue Marine. The term Coast Guard only dates from 1915. We were the first customs officers in the country. And the principle of what we call on-scene initiative started there. We deploy ships, not in battle groups, but independent cruising cutters. And that's been our tradition for well over 200 years. So in addition to the core values, you have to impart in folks the ability to act when they see a need to act without necessarily going up the chain of command and getting permission. It was never more remarkably displayed than in New Orleans after the landfall of Hurricane Katrina, when communications were severed. Most of those rescues that you saw being conducted down there were being done by people who were sometimes isolated from the command chain above them, but were empowered to act on scene with initiative to take whatever action was needed with the resources they have. And you got to build leaders that will do that for you, because you're not always going to be in contact with your chain of command. It's there. You build that discipline into folks as they come up through the organization, but when needed, that principle of on-scene initiative, which undergirds all Coast Guard operations, has to be implanted in our young people. And if I could just add a couple of comments to what was said earlier, I shamelessly plagiarized from Aaron Ladowski, whose book, Speaking Truth to Power, I use as the first question I ask anybody that's going to work for me. I sit down and I say, are you going to have the ability to speak truth to power? Will you come in and tell me things that I don't want to hear when I need to be told that? And it's gotten to be such a, I guess, a local legend in the Coast Guard right now. I have people come into my office, they shut the door, and they go, all right, this is a truth to power moment. So they warned me ahead of time. I guess the other maxim that I try and operate under is that, and everybody pretty much familiar with this that works around me, transparency of information breeds self-correcting behavior. If everybody sees it, it will change behavior. You won't have to give an order. And Admiral Zabrowski, one of the great, brilliant thinkers in the Navy, called it self-synchronization. If you see it and everybody understands the context, there is a cause for action. It doesn't have to be communicated every time. And again, that reinforces this notion of on-scene initiative.
In your own case, in Katrina, one of the things that was really, I think the whole country saw and understood later was, you didn't wait for the call. You didn't wait for the command. You just went and started rescuing people. And it made a real difference. Where did this come from? It was just something, it's just part of your being? How do you explain that?
Well, we practice doing that. Again, we operate in isolation with units that are out. I used to be a commanding officer of a cutter, and I would operate 500 to 1,000 miles offshore by myself doing law enforcement boardings. And you try and embed into our folks early on that here are your authorities, here are your competencies, here are the capabilities, here's how you're empowered to act. When you have a cause to act, we expect you will do that, and you're accountable to do that because you have a mission to do for the country. And we have a peculiar dual nature in the Coast Guard. We're a civilian law enforcement agency. At the same time, we're an armed force. And we turn those hats around, and it requires a tremendous amount of flexibility and adaptability in our people. And again, I think that was demonstrated in New Orleans, where we deployed our helicopters out of the path of the storm and came in right in behind it. So when it was still 50 and 60 knots of wind and still raining, we were able to get those helicopters into New Orleans because nobody had to be told that's what they were supposed to do. They knew they had to do it.
So, but it's really the preparation, and we were talking earlier today about the importance of preparation for decision making.
You have to raise those people from the minute they walk in the door. They have to understand the core values, honor, respect, and devotion to duty, and that we expect them, when given the proper tools, competencies, and training, that they'll be able to apply that, and they're empowered to do that.
Yeah, terrific. Let me just grab this. I want to turn to, yeah, please. Okay. Suzanne, brief point, then I want to turn to General Shinseki.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here and listen to all of you today. One of the things that, my name is Suzanne Goldstein. I graduated from the mid-career program in 2004, and I had the great honor of being part of that program, and I learned so much from my military classmates, more than perhaps I learned from anywhere else in the program. And the thing that I found so stunning was about the culture of inclusion. And that is that the leaders within the military at all the different levels, no matter how low down in the ranks, so to speak, is that they were included in the ability to make decisions, to understand the long-term mission, to use a compass, not a roadmap, as they say, and to actually understand what the long-range goal is. And one of the questions that I have for the group here is about what I consider the culture of isolation. So often we have hierarchies within organizations where the top brass is making a lot of decisions. It's not disseminating through the organization. We have a fledgling movement called organizational democracy happening in this country, where there is that flattening of hierarchy. But I'm wondering, how do we do that? And the thing that I've found in my own life that has been helpful about that is this idea that there's a generosity of spirit and a modeling of behavior. And I think that that's something I would love to hear you talk about, is how do you bring young people into the conversation?
Thank you. Let's turn here to General Shinseki. Can we have a microphone right over here? There have been a number of points put on the table, and I'm happy to have you respond to any number of them you'd like.
Well, thanks, David. Can you hear me? Yes. Thanks, David. Again, my apologies for being a little late getting here.
You're always welcome here.
I just came off of a platform at the Military Academy at West Point, where we have a class that's about to graduate in a couple of weeks, and that's not just at the U.S. Military Academy. That's at all of our service academies and all of our ROTC programs across our great country. You have youngsters who are about to go through a major transition in their lives. They're about to take the oath of office, put on a uniform, and they know what they're going to be doing. There is no question about what they do next. And they do also know that there's a great deal of responsibility and risk with that. And I would like to report to you that we're in good hands. I just had a session with a group of firsties, those are seniors at the Military Academy. And the questions they asked, I mean, this is 2 weeks before their commissioning. How do I get this right? How do I deal with giving orders that end up with people getting hurt and then having to give another set of orders, knowing we go out the door again, the day following? Those are the kinds of things I think all of us would wrestle with trying to answer. But the fact that the questions are being asked sort of put it, they're not worried about themselves or, what job am I going to have and will I have a chance to command? It's how do I take care of my people and get it done correctly? So edifying from an old guy that spent 38 years doing what they're about to do. And in 38 years you get to, like Thad Allen would agree, I think, we get to raise a good many of America's children. In the Army alone, we bring in about 180,000 youngsters every year. And with the turnover, you get to see a lot of our kids. And I would say, offer to you that they're tremendous ambassadors. Wherever we send them, you don't have to give a lesson in democracy or how a bill becomes a law in our country. They're sort of walking advertisements for what a democratic military force inside of civilian-controlled decision-making is all about. They do a good job of demonstrating what that is. I come from a very narrow spectrum on the discussion of leadership. Leadership for us begins broadly but ends up being the very narrow spectrum called in extremis leadership, much of what Thad also ends up doing. And because we know that when we end up having to exercise or let our youngsters exercise leadership under those conditions, there are no senior people present. There is absolute high level of stress, very little time, and decisions are being made by the youngest, bright as they are, by the youngest in terms of experience operationally. And so we spend a good bit of our time preparing them for that in extremis moment. And I think maybe this is a place where we differ on our focus on leadership with lots of other organizations. Other organizations may spend their time talking about leadership, about how to avoid crises. We, on the other hand, know that it's in the middle of crises that we have to be our best, and that's generally when we're going to be called upon to do something, and for all the conditions I described, we have to be successful, not just at the general or admiral level, but you have to be successful all the way through the organization, down to the individual performer, the young skipper, the sergeant, the captain, and in fact, leadership at that level in those situations, far more crucial that we have youngsters who get it right. We start early by trying to tell folks that there is a difference between command and leadership. Command is a title. Command is a piece of paper with orders on it, appointing you to a certain level of authority, but it's really the leadership that we want to work on. And to be a good leader, you have to love those you lead, because you're going to put them in some very difficult situations. And unless you love them, your tendency is to make some bad judgments, and that's what we got to work on. And we spend a good bit of time doing that.
Well, it's so interesting, this whole theme of leadership through the heart has run through these conversations. Let me just follow up with you on one point, if I might, Rick, if we could have the microphone back there. I've been very struck, and most recently by the visit of General David Petraeus. He came here to the school about 10 days ago, and we had a large crowd of students. We had a conversation about leadership. And here's a man who's, he was recognized with Howard Schultz last year and others, one of America's best leaders. He not only has been well trained, but he's been well educated. I mean, he has a PhD from Joe Nye's Princeton. He has a PhD in international relations from Princeton. And the current Chief of Staff of the Army has been saying in his speeches, we train for certainty, we educate for uncertainty. Mm-hmm. We train for certainty and we educate for uncertainty. I thought that was such an interesting approach that you all, the military, are taking very seriously. And I'm not sure we take it quite as seriously in our leadership or other parts of public life. Could you just touch on that?
Well, I've learned never to speak for other people. So I'll let David's comments stand. But yes, I mean, one of the challenges that we have, because it's the in extremis scenario that we're trying to anticipate, most of which we can't see with much clarity. You can run our training exercises one of two ways. You can give total intelligence to the players, and we can watch them all be Napoleonic. Or you can throttle back how much information you give them and let that reality settle in as the exercise unravels, and then force them to deal in uncertainty, make good decisions, trust their people to give them insights they wouldn't ordinarily otherwise have, and continue to make good decisions even when they're exhausted. But we do anticipate that uncertainty is a large part of our environment, and we have to learn to deal with it. Human nature, I think, most of us would say, watching young commanders go through the exercise the first time, in uncertainty, people slow their decisions. They hesitate. They'll take the option that's safest when it may be entirely the wrong decision. And so we force people to get outside of their zone of comfort and push the envelope.
David, if I can make a quick comment.
Yes, please.
We have kind of bright lines in the military that clearly identify what is education, what is training, what is doctrine. And they have specific meaning. And there's certain places where you want standardization, you don't want deviation. You want everybody to know what to expect the other person is going to do. And then you put leadership over the top of that so you can adapt to the situation at hand from a leadership standpoint and apply those resources to best mission effect. So it's kind of a polar opposite there. You don't want any ambiguity in certain things, right, but you want to be able to manage ambiguity against the situation.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. Where's Scott Snook? Is he here? Is Scott Snook here? He had to leave? Because there was one other issue I just want to bring up very briefly in terms of the military, and that is that when Scott was at West Point, they did a lot of work on leadership development and how they should do it more effectively. They keep returning to this issue and renewing their understanding of it, and I think it's made a difference. And they came up with a motto for leadership development called Be, Know, Do. And the knowing they can teach in the classroom, the doing they often teach out in field exercises, but the be part, the character development part, is the challenge. And no one quite knows how to come to grips with that. How do you all do that? What have you discovered about, because I think in what we've heard so much in the business discussion, and I want to move on to the scholars who are here, what David McCullough wrote in his book on Harry Truman was that character is the single most important asset of a president. And how does a school encourage, how do you do that in the military? How do you encourage character development?
Well, that's the reason I started my comments earlier with our core values. And as General Shinseki said, we raise America's youth, and they come from different cultures and background. And while there's certain things that you want to standardize in terms of doctrine. You also want them to understand there's a common culture and a common character that you want them to have as a precursor for being able to put those folks in crisis situations and have them be effective leaders. Now, in the Coast Guard, it's honor, respect, and devotion to duty. In the Navy, it's honor, courage, and commitment, I believe. But everybody has a set of those watchwords. They're intended to mold character, if you will, or create character, or to bring out those traits that are waiting to be found, if you will.
As Warren said.
So those people
Yeah.
are empowered to act.
That's interesting. All right, let's now turn to Bob Sternberg, who has started a noble experiment at the Tufts, and it's one of the most interesting experiments in the country, to if he can bring to a civilian institution of higher learning some of these understandings. He's thought about this an awful lot in his scholarly role at Yale, running an institute there. And now you've come here as the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. You've got the support of your president and of your board. What are you trying to do?
Well, what we've done traditionally in the country, if you go back a long way, is we have picked leaders on the basis of their being children of privilege. And so in the 20th century, people at Harvard decided that wasn't such a good idea. So they try to come up with a better system, and they came up with perhaps a worse one, and that is pick people on the basis of multiple choice tests. And if you spent your career taking multiple choice tests, this would be a really good system. But most of us, since we've entered our career, haven't been taking multiple choice tests. And so the question is, might there be something else that's the purpose of education besides teaching kids to take multiple choice tests? Although under the current administration, essentially schools are becoming test preparation courses, so that's what we're doing. So what we believe is that the purpose of education is not to teach kids how to take multiple choice tests, at least as a primary goal of education, but rather to develop leadership. The slogan at Tufts, which is new this year, is new leaders for a changing world. Had it been changing leaders in a changing world, growing leaders in a changing world, we would be Harvard. But we pick new leaders in a changing world, so we're Tufts. And so I interpret that, and since I had something to do with it, I have some right to do that, that the purpose of education, at least at Tufts, and I believe this is the purpose of education, is to develop the next generation of leaders and not multiple choice test takers. So what we're doing is we're organizing, or at least we're trying to organize, the entire School of Arts and Sciences, and hopefully some of the other schools, around the notion that the purpose of education is to develop leaders, not test takers and not just fine children of privilege. How are we doing it? The first thing we're doing is with regard to admissions. If you want to have a new generation of leaders, then you want to pick them, and you're not going to pick them by giving them multiple choice tests. It's relevant to your point on uncertainty that those are A, B, C, D deals, and in life they don't even give you the problems, much less the choices. So what we have done, based on a project we did at Yale called the Rainbow Project, is we've developed measures of creative and practical thinking. So the creative measures are things like you get titles of stories like Beyond the Edge, The Octopus's Sneakers, 3,621. The spy wasn't caught after all. And so when you get about a dozen of those, you pick two of them and you write short creative stories. Or you get a New Yorker type cartoon and you caption it. Or you see some artistic collages, say of a bunch of musicians, and you tell a story. And we're including practical measures where you get a kind of problem that a student would confront in college. For example, two roommates in a triple are arguing over who should get the larger bedroom. How do you resolve the argument? And what we found in our studies at Yale, and these were national studies done in colleges ranging from community colleges to very highly prestigious schools, Yale, Harvard wasn't included, we just couldn't go that high. What we found is that using these as supplements to the SAT, they're not replacements, they're supplements, we doubled prediction freshman year performance, and we reduced ethnic group differences very substantially. Very substantial reduction, simultaneously. And usually when you reduce ethnic group differences, you don't get increases in prediction, but we did, which means that increasing academic excellence and decreasing group differences are two sides of the same coin, not different coins. So starting in 2006, applicants to Tufts, on the Tufts-specific application, will have these kinds of problems so that they can show their creative and practical skills. We've already piloted them this past year, and so we know that it'll help us identify new leaders who we couldn't identify under the old system. The second part of this initiative is if you get the students into your school, then you have to teach them in a way that you don't set them up to fail. Because most teachers who teach at college level have no training in teaching whatsoever. So they teach the way their teachers did, which is to teach rote for memory. And a lot of kids, including me, don't learn that way. It's not just kids who are from underrepresented groups. A lot of people aren't memorizers. So we're starting on July 1st, the Center for the Enhancement of Learning and Teaching, CELT. Those who participate in it are Celtics. And professors will be given either $7,000 or a course reduction to become fellows of the center and learn how to teach to kids who have diverse learning styles, to teach the creative learners, the analytical learners, practical learners, wise learners, and so on. The idea being that once you get the kids in, you have to teach to them. A third part of this initiative is a value-added project, and that is if the purpose of education is to develop leadership, we have to know whether we're doing it. I mean, how do you know whether you're doing that? There's some value-added measures that just measure analytical thinking. They're SAT-like measures. But leaders are not just good critical thinkers. They're also creative thinkers, they're practical thinkers, and they're wise thinkers. Creativity, analytical intelligence, practical intelligence, and wisdom. You need the creativity to come up with the ideas as a leader. You need the analytical intelligence to know if they're good ideas. You need the practical intelligence to implement the ideas and persuade other people of their value and bring people along with you rather than just hoping that because you're the leader, people will listen to you. And you need the wisdom to ensure that they're for a common good.
But Howard Gardner is just, he's heading for the door, but I just want to invite him into this conversation. We've been waiting to get him. Howard Gardner, as many of you know, was the man who really had the insight into multiple intelligences, a thought of a concept that is now becoming much more familiar and has really been working on this issue. And I just would love to hear you respond, Howard, on this question to what Bob Sternberg has just put on the table, because it seems to me so, it echoes a lot of what you've been working on over the years.
Well, of course, is this on? Yes. Yeah, Bob and I go back a long way, and while we disagree about many things, I think what he's proposing to do at Tufts is great. I was walking out not as a statement, but because I have a 4 o'clock meeting. But I did have a somewhat more synthesizing comment on the day.
Please do. We've been waiting to hear from you. Please.
Okay. And we began with, you remember, the issue of the crucible and crucible experiences, and then on the relationship between emotions and cognition. And now I've been talking about the development of leaders. And so I asked myself, what can we learn from people who are the epitome of leaders? And I'm choosing the political realm, which is not something we focused on in this particular session. And I picked 2 people, and what's interesting about them is their names have almost the same letters. And I don't know if anybody ever noticed this before. Abraham Lincoln and Bill Clinton. The last names are virtual anagrams of one another. Lincoln is almost everybody's epitome of a great American leader. Clinton, who many of you know very well, I would describe as close but no cigar. And they have a lot in common. They both came from poverty. They both, in politics, had meteoric rises, but not without losses and failures, which we can document. Lots of crucible experiences. Both elected 2 times. Both great storytellers. The times, of course, were very different. I admired Clinton, but it seems to me that there was one thing which Lincoln had that Clinton lacks, at least so far. And in another minute, I'll tell you that it's not too late to atone. And that is that Clinton was a great storyteller, but he told too many stories, and it wasn't clear which ones he really believed in and which ones he was really willing to go to the mat for. Both of them had, in addition to the crucible experiences, a terrific capacity to think about things not only cognitively, rationally, but also emotionally. Clinton, of course, felt pain, and he really did. I don't think it was an act. As Doris Kearns tells us, Lincoln brought into his cabinet people who thought very differently, and he tried to understand them. His famous second inaugural with malice toward none and charity toward all, I think, epitomizes an ability to put yourself in the place of the other. But what I think Clinton lacked was not technical capacity in politics. He and Lincoln had that in abundance. Not charisma. I think they both had it in abundance as well. But Clinton lacked a guiding compass of where he was trying to go. I would even say it was a moral, ethical kind of compass. I don't use the word soul and spirit and heart, which many of you have been using. I guess it's because we don't have places like in psychology, we don't know where those are located. But the words I would say would be that with Lincoln, you knew what his goals were, you knew what the central mission was. It began with the Union, and then it extended to freedom for the slaves. It was a view that was always trying to be more inclusive, not exclude people. Many leaders who are very successful exclude, but they aren't ones we admire. And he was tremendously transparent about his thinking. And I think the lack of steadfastness is around a mission is what I think Clinton lacked. The interesting thing is, someone said earlier, Carter was not a successful president, but I think he's been a successful ex-president because his missions have been very clear. I love Clinton's involvement in things, but I worry because every few months it's a different kind of involvement. It's a different focus. It's obesity one week and AIDS another week and globalization the third week. And I think the lesson which all of us can learn, whether we're students at the Kennedy School or people in any of the professions that are represented there, here in the room or on the dais, is not to have too many goals, to stick to them, to correct course as necessary, but to keep your eye on that distant ball. And I'm going to be late for my appointment, so thanks for letting me.
Thank you, Howard. We're looking forward to your next book. We're coming down the home stretch, so I want to invite Richard Hackman into this conversation. He's been extremely patient, but always brings enormous value to conversations. Richard, your perspective at this hour.
In the interest of time, very quickly, what I want to do is just offer one reflection on the whole business of leadership development, not so much in terms of the practice of it or the education of it, as Bob has been talking about, but from the point of view of the researchers and the scholars, which is another perspective that we bring. That is, what is it that we need to know? What is it that we need to learn about in order to be able to do a better job? That Bob would do a better job, that the executives here would do a better job, that the military leaders would do a better job, if we knew certain things. Well, what are the things that we most need to know that researchers might be able to help us find out about the whole leadership development business? And I want to offer something that I think I'd like to offer for your consideration in that regard. But the premise is that, and I've heard this ever since we started this morning, the premise is you can't teach leadership, okay? Warren said this many years ago, and many people have echoed. You can't just come in and make somebody into a great leader any more than you can have a child as a parent and make that child into a mature adult with great character and great integrity and the other attributes that we would like to have in our children. You can't make it be true. Skinner tried, we'll shape the kid, and we sometimes try to shape our junior associates into great leaders, but it can't be done. So what do you do if you can't make somebody into a great leader? Well, one alternative, which actually many schools, including some professional schools, do, is punt, okay? We can't make them into great leaders, and therefore we'll say, well, this is really something you need to do on your own. It's really self-development, and so good luck. Or they say, well, we can't teach you how to be a good leader, but we can teach you how to do analysis. So we're going to give you a lot of cases and a lot of quantitative tools, and we'll teach you how to analyze. Well, much better than either punting or teaching somebody something that isn't actually leadership would be to just pass this out. It's called On Becoming a Leader, and it was written many years ago with a recent updated forward, because the wisdom in here really would be helpful to people in learning how to become a leader. But what could scholars do? And this is the suggestion I want to make, and then I'll be done. It may be that we need to reframe the question. A simple cognitive reframing that moves it off of what we do as teachers or as educators of leadership to people, and instead ask, because those of us who are in positions of leadership in the academy, in the military, and business, because we have some power, maybe we reframe it and say, what are the conditions that we can put in place that increase the chances, don't guarantee, but that increase the chances that somebody is going to have good developmental experiences on their way to becoming a leader. And this, interestingly enough, is exactly what great parents do, okay? They don't try to manage the reinforcement contingencies as Skinner did to try to shape their kid. Instead, they put into place the conditions of a loving family, a safe environment for learning, boundaries on what's acceptable. Roll the dice a little bit within those conditions, and the kid may grow up to be the kind of kid that you can really be proud of as a parent. And I believe in this condition creating thing all across the board, by the way. I take it all the way.
Just somehow in a form to others who couldn't be here. I don't know how you're going to do it, but it would be a huge error. Speaking as chairman of your advisory board, it would be a huge error if we couldn't pull it together. And we can do it because you set this thing up, and we've heard so much wisdom, and I could cavil, as we say in Yiddish, over so many things I heard today. But I want to take off on what you just said, David, and you're the master at ending. So I'm going to hand this to you. I'm going to take only 3 minutes. No, don't grab it yet. I'm going to take only because I want to take off from where Richard was in his because I'm going to take off from his, hope I can keep up his pace, because he knew he has limited in time. And I want to just say that I thought it was, so I think a thing I would only add to Richard's last remarks, and I was impressed, I also have to kind of bow also to you, Bob Sternberg, for the kinds of effort, the aspirations that I'm totally behind, and I think you'll pull it off. I want to add only one thing to Richard. It's not just in the master category. I think it's asking the right questions. Because you said we're ending, and I was thinking about what could I possibly add to today. And I think if we're going to talk really about young leaders, developing leaders, and boy, am I pleased to see not only some of my students from Harvard here, but some of my students who are from USC who are here today. And because we've been trying to teach this stuff for 11 years, as you know, and we can't create the conditions, I'm sure. But I was thinking, what are the questions I would ask aspiring leaders, and what can we? And I'm going to end with that. And I thought about 5, David. And the first one is, if we can get people to ask these questions and maybe answer them, it would be a step toward developing leadership at the point, Eric, and elsewhere. Okay, do you really want to be one? Holy smoke. Okay. 2, do you know what brings you happiness? And the sub-question is, do they match? And 3, do you know how you learn? And a sub-question of that is, are we open to the unbidden? Do we learn? Do we know how we learn? And are we also open? This got to do with the whole quote you made about we educate for uncertainty. It's a brilliant quote. We train for certainty. Okay. 4th question is, do you have the discipline to earn the assets to lead? I mean, you talked about, when you and Chris Gergen spoke to our class just 2 weeks ago, you talked about assets as in the 30s. You really got to develop the base. But what we've discovered in our leadership class is, no kidding, is discipline, showing up, being on time, being there, getting the papers. If you correlate just the discipline without any of the content, those are our A students. And finally, do you know you can never do it alone? It's not about you or me. Do you know if you're going to be a leader, it's a relationship, and it's a relationship with others, and you know you're not going to pull it off by yourself. And in this room, there are at least 4 or 5 co-authors, and I'm going to probably err on not mentioning one, but there's Pat Biederman, who wrote a book with me. There's Jim O'Toole, who has written lots of things with me. There's Bob Thomas, who is also the co-author of Geeks and Geezers, and may have thought about that phrase. I don't want to think so, but I think he invented the phrase crucibles for that book. Awful. I still, I'm going to end with a lovely quote that we have, that Pat Biederman and I wrote about in our book, Organized News, about leading in a team situation, Richard. And it's an Italian poet who once wrote, "We're all angels with only one wing. We can fly only while we embrace each other."
Thank you. You can certainly understand why we call today Warren Bennis's unfinished legacy. Please know today we also are very aware this is an unfinished symphony. There were many voices that were heard. There were so many other voices we would love to have heard, and time simply did not permit a chance to get everyone in. I hope that you'll be forgiving of us for that. But there's so many of the rest of us we would like to have come back and play in another time, in an encore. But in the meantime, if you would, with Bill George and Richard Hackman and Sidney Harmon and Bob Sternberg and Thad Allen and Spencer Johnson, would you all please thank them?